Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, do not touch mic, please. I guess I should read the directions before I touch things. Well, I first want to just say thanks to the Quivera staff and the conference organizers for dealing with my crazy schedule. I was stuck in San Francisco last night. I was on the first flight out of there this morning, so a little exhausted, a little tired, but happy to be here. I get energy from seeing people and be able to talk with you all. So, as Sarah mentioned, my name is James Calabaza. I am from Santo Domingo, Pueblo, which is 30 minutes south of here, and I actually get to go home tomorrow to see my family. It's been a while since I've been back here in New Mexico, and as Sarah mentioned, we had a really great harvest of red chilies, and the last few months of my fingers have been really bruised and cut because of tying ristras and such, so it's going to be great to see that kind of aesthetics on our family house. So I work with Trees, Water, and People. We are a nonprofit organization based in Colorado, but also have an office here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We work with several local public communities around specifically post-fire restoration, watershed restoration, and how can we how to protect their cultural lifeways and their direct connection to the landscape. There we go. I first wanted to start off with just a quote that I always love. It's from an individual that I've always admired growing up, reading his books, his pieces. But to me, living in Colorado now, my roots are always going to be New Mexico. And that's something that is deeply embedded with traditional ecological knowledge, is understanding where your roots are, where you come from, who your ancestors are, and what they brought to the table and what they provided for you and what you can provide back to them. So for me, I always look at this and it brings me home. It gets me grounded again. It gives me the opportunity to reflect, think, and look at opportunities down the road. Most of you may have known this place. This is with the Caja del Rio here along the Rio Grande River. As most of you all know, the Rio Grande River is our lifeways as New Mexicans, but also for our neighbors downstream in Texas. This is my place. This is my home. As a Pueblo person, my people have been forcefully taken off that landscape, but we still have sites. We still have opportunities to go out there for pilgrimages and cultural uses. But I always start off with this picture because, again, traditional ecological knowledge is about getting grounded, grounding yourself. What does that mean to you, and how are you going to carry that knowledge forward? You all know, or most of you may know, this general area of the Caja del Rio is now being threatened with development by the federal government. There's an article that came out a few weeks ago about some development. There's some pushback from local tribes because they understand the significance and historical connection of this landscape to our peoples. Just to show you more, again, I'm a picture person. I'm not a scientist. I am not a researcher. I'm not going to show charts. I'm not going to do any of that. But I would love to show you pictures of, the connection back to our landscapes and how TEK is embedded into that. This is just a few photos that, the Jemez Mountains, which is, to the west of us, and then, just in our backyards, the Sangre de Cristos. And when we look at these mountains, we usually don't think about their health all the time. We don't think about what's happening. We see the seasonal changes, throughout the year. We get to go out there for recreation, for hunting, for winter skiing, whatever. But sometimes we, as humans, we never take that moment to sit down and be with nature for the moment. And that's something that TEK has taught me and my people about, is being one with the environment and the community. Community meaning non-human relatives. Everything in that landscape is a living being. And I think that's where sometimes Western science doesn't see the importance of TEK or doesn't find it valuable, because it's some things that usually you can't measure, you can't track. It's not tangible, but it's there as a living spirit. As most of you all know, New Mexico is rich with our indigenous peoples, history, cultures. Here in this space right now, we're all sitting and standing in occupied territories and homes of many of the Pueblo people. And the reason why I put this picture up, and I know the Regenerate Conference is heavily focused on agriculture, agrarian work, For Pueblo people, our connection to the landscape, if it's forest, to the water, to farming, is very rich. It's our way of life. Corn is our way of life. We need corn to be able to survive, to process, to connect with our ancestors, and be able to get innovative into the future. So growing up in the Pueblo, I participated in several, a lot of dances. I actually still have sunburn marks from dancing for August 4th for Santo Domingo Feast Day. But the burn scars that I have, it resembles traditional ecological knowledge. You're absorbing something by putting your body out there in a vulnerable space and learning how to coexist with nature. I like to say it's adaptation, because you're pushing your body to adapt to a shifting climate. As you know, our summers are getting hotter. They're getting tougher to be able to do. Just this year, the Rio Grande River dried up in Albuquerque. First time in my life I've ever seen the Rio Grande River dry up. So it just talks about the importance of how TEK plays a role in our work as people, as farmers, conservationists, etc. But recently, the climate's changing. I don't know if there's any federal employees here. I don't want to say climate change, but I'm going to say it. But New Mexico is seeing a lot of fires. It's not the idea of if, but when. People are still recovering from the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon up in northern New Mexico. It's becoming something that we need to understand. And by understanding it is by working with our tribal and indigenous peoples. Because through their lens and through their knowledge system, fire is not a bad thing. It's actually a form of medicine. Today, a lot of Forest Service staff, federal land management and state land management agencies are really working to integrate cultural fire into prescription plans. We still have a long ways to go, but it's making good progress regarding how fire can play a role in protecting our ecosystems, our forests, our communities, and ourselves. And these are just, some of the impacts that you may have seen, we've all seen, from a post-fire landscape. The reason why I put these pictures here, and I was trying to connect them, but I couldn't figure it out on the plane. But basically, from a fire, it leads to a burnt landscape. And what happens when you have a heavy monsoon? Flooding. Flooding destroys infrastructure. It takes away precious topsoil. Soils become hydrophobic. And then what happens when we have no watershed or trees to soak in the annual moisture we get? The rivers dry up. And when the river dries up, our farmers are not able to produce the crop that we need. And crops are not just for the economical and commodity value, for value-added chains. It's sustenance. It's our deep connection back to the landscape and to our history. So one project I want to talk about that's what we're working on here locally in the East Jemez Mountains is this project called Restoring Lands, Restoring Trust. And I want you to focus on that one word, trust. I was just in San Francisco, an elder was talking to all of us that progress is based on the speed of trust. And I just hope, we got into politics and we're like, that's something we're not seeing from our federal leadership. They're not trusting each other. It's, in a way, it's slowing us down. They're not funneling the resources we need, but by working with our indigenous peoples, they've had to, survive over 400 years of American capitalism, colonialism. They think about it in generations, not administrations. And so that's something we've been learning a lot about resiliency in this project, but also within our direct everyday life, is how can you navigate the bureaucratic challenges and shifts that we're all experiencing right now by working holistically together as community members. So our project in the Jemez Mountains is led by 3 local tribal communities, Pueblo Zacochiti, Santo Domingo, and Jemez, along with other local NGOs and for-profit businesses and federal land management agency to work together to build out a healthier future for our forests, for our downstream users, and by also integrating and protecting cultural heritage and knowledge for these Pueblo peoples. So over the last few years, we've been able to convene, we've been able to do site visits, learn, strategize, Also get a little bit uncomfortable with, not agreeing with each other. That's okay. We're all humans. We cannot agree. But it really comes down to that point of what is TEK? In this room, does everyone who here has a kind of a general idea what TEK is? All right, about half. But TEK, to my understanding, is like there's no one uniform definition. TEK can come in many practices, customs, stories, languages, etc. And that's what we're trying to do here, is that by bringing in today's cutting edge science and applying it and balancing out with traditional ecological knowledge, it's building out an opportunity for resilient futures, resilient communities in this context. It's been wonderful to be out there in the field with these partners because, again, they have historical data that you will never find on Google. You will never find in the OneNote shared drive. It's all orally based. And that's something I learned growing up as a Pueblo person is we have to be active listeners because as traditions are passed orally, we have to learn to listen, process, and apply that critically so that we can continue to preserve that knowledge system. I'm a big fan of quotes. Another elder once told me, we gotta listen twice as much as we speak. There's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And that's something I've kept with me for a very long time is like, wow, like as a up and coming, early mid-career individual, I gotta start listening more to our elders, our tribal partners. Again, they have knowledge and data that can go back towards, the first European contact. They have that data that allows us to know how fire regimes, how forests have adapted to shifting climates before in the past. So it's really critical today that when we work on projects and you have an indigenous community close by or an indigenous organization close by, to welcome them, invite them. But not just inviting them to be, a check mark on the sheet, but actually opening up the doors for them to voice their true thoughts, their priorities, and their needs. So through this project, we were able to create 2 kind of guiding frameworks. The first one I'll talk about is the one on the right here. We realized that through this effort, we have 5 priorities we want to accomplish as a community or as a project team. First one is dignified livelihoods. We want to make sure that the people doing the work are invested into it, but they also are finding value out of it. We just don't want them to be like, let's say something different. Indigenous peoples, as natural stewards, do not do it just for a paycheck. They're doing it for the protection of their history and their culture. That's something we recognize, and that's what we put into as dignified livelihoods, is that the work that they do, there has to be value in it. Environmental stewardship. It's what our organization really exists about. That's what we do every day, is the active stewardship in the forests, in the riparian areas, and then also our agrarian ecosystems. Gender equity and inclusion. We really believe and want to support more Native women into leadership capacities and spaces. I'm really glad to see and hear that there's more and more Native students in higher education these days doing some amazing graduate level research or even undergraduate research. So it always just gives me great joy to be able to hear and see that. Indigenous sovereignty. This is a major one, a big one. Because when we talk about sovereignty, it's mostly on the lens of government and politics. Sovereign nations, federal recognized. But if you go even deeper than that, sovereignty means water sovereignty, land access, land rematriation, and the list can go on. So as conservationists, as experts and leaders in our communities, we got to look at how can we empower communities and empower ourselves to be able to look at sovereignty differently from just a governmental viewpoint. And then lastly, youth development. All of us here are going to outlive, some of these topics and cases or research that we've been discussing today. I feel like as a millennial, I inherited technology, but I also inherited a lot of problems that, came from the generation before me. Like, here in New Mexico, like Los Alamos National Laboratory, it's always been a long time thing of just poor poor way of getting rid of their nuclear waste. And that's something, we got to bring in our youth to understand that that's going to carry on for generations. Because like I said earlier, tribal people think in generations, not administrations. They don't think for just 1 decade. They think about 40, 50 years from now. But it's important to involve our youth today because they're going to be our leaders and our stewards for tomorrow. And then the other framework there on the other side of this slide is more of a holistic viewpoint of what TEK is. It integrates and embodies so many different forms of knowledge, decisions, people, etc. And we always say, like, it's a holistic model, and it's always circular. Whereas, like, sometimes in Western science or Western education, things are very linear. Like, you want to go from here to there, and if you get to that point, accomplish, project done. But for indigenous knowledge, things are always circular. Things are always evolving. Things are adapting. You learn through that process and are able to evaluate and bring in adaptive management into the context. So passing the mic. Personally, I think I shouldn't be the one up here speaking. I hope my partners from the Pueblos will have an opportunity sometime down the future to be able to present and talk more about the project. But yeah, it's important that we elevate TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, into these spaces, and I'm very thankful to the Quivira Coalition and conference sponsors for inviting me to talk a little bit about TEK. I'm not an expert in TEK. I only come from, my knowledge is what I've learned from one community's perspective of TEK. But I think it's probably safe to say that, across the board, tribes are natural stewards. They're natural conservationists. They don't do this just for a paycheck. They don't do this just to be able to, provide something to the research community or another community. They're actively learning, evaluating, but protecting their cultural livelihoods as well. There's a strong emphasis now that TEK can play an important role in future land management. Forest Service here in New Mexico, I think Region 3 is really looking into the importance of integrating cultural fire. Again, cultural fire is critical. Something I just learned recently, that when you want to do cultural fire, it's not about the fire, it's about protecting the culture. And it's something that, shook my foundations of it, because I always thought cultural fire was helping the environment. But truly, on the back end, it's helping that community maintain its way of life. Then we got to start challenging, conservation groups to consider these new strategies and approaches. We cannot be comfortable with where we are. We're not going to be able to advance as a people. We're not going to be able to advance as communities if we stay in our comforting bubble. We got to get out there. We got to challenge ourselves. We got to challenge our public officials and elected leaders to think about that as well. And then lastly, again, it's more than protecting land and resources. It's cultural survival. Stories go back, talking about, the creation times. How do we coexist with landscapes before development came into place? Those stories are really critical today, because as more and more communities are urbanizing, are developing, there are things that they don't know about. Yes, they can go to SHPO, they can do all of the NEPA stuff, but truly they don't have that knowledge to understand that there may be a cultural site right there unless they start talking with local tribes and Pueblos. Tribes, Pueblo people are natural storytellers. I swear, if my grandpa was right here, right now, talking with you all, he'll be talking your ear off. Like, they are just, you let them go, you give them 5 minutes, expect 30 minutes. Like, that's kind of how it goes. But the reason why storytelling is important, because those stories have the knowledge and historical context of landscapes and people coexisting with it. They have stories about how the river, again, being a living being and spirit, carves through canyons, why it carved through that canyon. Yes, we may be able to look at it more from a geomorphological or a geological composition or point of view, but we don't know, you will never know really the true spirit behind it unless you value storytelling. And storytelling today is actually becoming a more and more respected form of impact reporting. I want to give a shout out to our foundation funders, some of them in the room, who have accepted storytelling as a way of reporting back on the impact of our work on an annual or multi-year basis. Because again, you give a Native person 5 minutes, they're going to take 30. And they're going to take that opportunity then writing out something that they have, been forcefully introduced into which, Western-based educational system. Engaging with those local, regional, and national groups is critical. How many folks in this room actually work or are part of a network, collaborative partnership with the tribe or indigenous community? Okay, smaller number. Well, I challenge you all. Next year, hopefully there could be someone standing up here and asking that same question. Hopefully we'll get 100% response from the audience. It's difficult, it's tough. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Working with tribes is difficult. You gotta understand their own government systems, but also their culture code and their way of life, their own priorities. Sometimes they don't align with their own priorities, but you gotta be flexible, you gotta adapt. And that's what TEK can teach us. Adapting and flexible to a shifting climate, shifting political regime, and shifting community norms. Storytelling is that innate ability, like I said. I can't stress it enough. We need more storytelling. I think our world, our community needs storytellers to tell, who we are and what we can do. Who here is a Game of Thrones fan? Do y'all remember that one scene where Tyrion Lannister was like, there's nothing more powerful than a story? When I heard that, I was like, man, he might be indigenous. He might be indigenous, but I don't know what tribe. But it just brings that context into play, like really. What he said, it was like true traditional ecological knowledge. It's people, you can persuade, you can encourage, you can empower people by a great story. A story that connects them back to their roots, connects them back to their own personal values, but as well building out a larger community value and norm. And then in storytelling, it helps reshape those learning abilities that, respect indigenous values. As an indigenous person, I always struggled with writing out or typing out things, but I can always express what's happening by just talking to someone directly. And I think that's where storytelling, by incorporating more storytelling in our, workspace culture, it allows for different ways of learning. And that's something, again, growing up and going to a public education school system here in New Mexico, they were like, you gotta write out this report, you gotta write out this essay. But what if we just tell you that essay? You just take 30 minutes and you sit down with me, we'll write it out, or we'll talk it out together. And that's something that we can look at how we can reshape that. People over projects. This is my grandpa, by the way, and my little cousin. But people over projects. We got to look at how, we grow at the pace of relationships. And this was actually just early this year. That's a sweet peas field down in Santo Domingo. I don't know where my little cousin got that little snap peas already. But we got to reinforce and protect that internal and external culture. We got to look at how our workspaces recognize TEK as a valuable educational knowledge system, and then use that as an opportunity to empower and educate more on the external side of things. We need to invest in systems and structures. We gotta support and advocate for our indigenous communities. Again, that's where that sovereignty piece comes in. How can we as individuals that have privileges, that have resources, access to resources, be able to empower and invest in structural systems reform? And I'm glad to hear that here in New Mexico, a lot of those systems reform and changes are happening. Community well-being. We got to look at the community well-being to get to that long-term impact. Some funders, some people love to see or want like 1 year reports of like, what did you do in a year? What was that impact like? But you really can't trace or measure impact in a 1 year cycle. You got to give it time. But you also got to look at it from the community sense as well, that social science aspect. How does the community feel about this project? Have they learned something new? What kind of feedback can they provide to us so we can shift and adapt our strategy? And then local people are most invested. They're our #1 champions. They're the ones who know, and know their ecosystems and their environments better than we all could. And then trust is that verb. It's actionable. We just got to be able to trust each other. Trust that we can be able to coexist, co-manage, and co-steward landscapes that we all depend on. I wanted to finish off with this photo because this is me, my grandpa, and my little brother, 3 generations, well, I would say 4 generations of Pueblo stewards. We are planting Douglas fir trees back on our tribal lands after the 2011 Las Conchas burn scar. We're not doing it out there for, carbon credits, or we're not doing it out there for like post-fire restoration. We're doing it for protection of cultural heritage. Because if you all saw it earlier, there was a photo there where indigenous peoples, we use our relatives, we pay respect to our relatives, and for us, Douglas fir is an important tree species. We use it for our feast days. Pretty sure most of you have probably been to a Pueblo feast day and see the significance of Douglas fir. So I always come back to this image of knowing that we are 4 generations of Pueblo people actively integrating TEK into practice, weaving TEK across generations, and trusting that, we're going to believe and that Mother Nature is going to heal. But with that, because I think I have 5 minutes or something like that. Okay, but I just wanted to say that's it. Thank you. I hope that this is something that's empowering, and I'd love to have questions.
All right, we're going to start over here.
Thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation. And you gave a lot of great examples of, how to support efforts like this. But I was just wondering, so for a lot of us in the room that are ranchers, what are the ways that sort of we can get involved to support movements like this and do better, sort of given our country's complex history and what has led to people like me ranching in California? What actions can we take, and in what areas can we get out of the way?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Definitely a few answers there, but I think the first one is, support and empower like Native Indigenous-led organizations. I know I was walking around the other room earlier, and INCA, Indian Nations Conservation Alliance, doing some amazing work, supporting tribal farmers, producers, ranchers. Get involved. Ask them what can you do, as a non-Native person. Get involved with local community events. Here in New Mexico, we have so many feast days and ceremonies throughout the year. Go down there, meet people down there. I think that's where you really develop those personal relationships. These relationships shouldn't always be focused through a professional pathway. It should look at from a personal viewpoint as well. But then lastly is like advocating for, certain things that may, tribes want to position. Like, for example, the Cajal del Rio, the infrastructure that, that's going to go up. Tribes are opposed to it. Stand and support those tribes, tell them about, the importance of why the infrastructure and development should be taking place in those landscapes.
So that's real loud. The question I got actually kind of builds on what she was asking as well. So I know a lot of us live in areas where the indigenous population was completely pushed out, relocated, or even eradicated. And so how do we, given that situation, move forward with implementing a lot of what you're talking about into our land management practices and, how to be better stewards?
Yeah. So Trees, Water, and People is fortunate to be part of a project in Southwest Colorado with the Montezuma Land Conservancy, and there's folks here from that organization that they should be talking about land rematriation. And so the project that I'll refer to is called Traditional Harvest. Traditional Harvest is a effort that's led by the Ute Mountain Ute tribe with Montezuma Land Conservancy to help the tribe and private landowners in Southwest Colorado actively steward and preserve critical natural resources. Landowners are creating these relationships with people from the Toyac community to come and harvest materials needed for cultural uses, but also replenish that, and learning the importance of, what you take, you got to give back. And, a lot of these landowners come from very heavy Western academic backgrounds, so they never have understood the importance of reciprocity until working with under this program of Traditional Harvest. I would love to see more of those type of efforts happen across the country. Montezuma Land Conservancy, actually, they presented at the annual rally conference this year, room full of land trusts, about the importance of starting to integrate land rematriation, not necessarily land back, it's rematriating and rekindling those relationships of the indigenous peoples back to landscapes that, you know, they're from. They have stories to it. I know with public lands it's a little harder, but if you are able to and have like private lands and want to work with a tribe or a community, talk to Montezuma Land Conservancy. They will definitely give you all some great information. And I wish we could also show more about, or we actually have a film of that project that I wish we could have shown, but some efforts like that are happening across the scale.
Anyone else? Oh, Bradley?
I think this one's me.
Oh.
So you had mentioned in your talk that you all were able to get storytelling as an accepted form of reporting to your funders. What was that process like? And how did you guys end up deciding on what would be that acceptable form of storytelling?
Great question, because storytelling comes with intellectual property. And, you know, as a nonprofit organization, a non-indigenous led nonprofit organization, we don't own that property, you know, or that data. So we work closely with our partners in terms of we interview them about like the questions that our funders give us beforehand and like ask them like, how would you address this? You know, pretty conventional approach for reporting questions. And then we sit down with our partners in a virtual space or in-person capacity and talk with them. We usually just do an audio recording of it, but some partners are okay with video. But when we provide that back to our funders, we always inform them like, keep this internal, do not share it externally. But we always get approval from our tribal partners before we submit a report back to a funder, because again, there's a lot of intellectual properties that are involved in storytelling. And as for folks who are interested in storytelling, like keep that in mind. You know, if you want to record something or you want to capture that data, there's going to be multiple rounds of review, edits. Thankfully, we have an in-house filmmaker who's able to, you know, dedicate a lot of that time just to go back and work with our partners on honoring their wishes and their approvals in terms of what can be shared back. Funders love it. I think there's a paradigm shift in the philanthropic world now around trust-based philanthropy, and they've recognized and understand that people sometimes struggle with writing reports. They rather hear it naturally or organically through a form of like a medium channel that they're most comfortable with. And we just found great success from it. And the other thing too is instead of reporting back to funders individually, we kind of put our foot on the ground too. It's like, y'all are invited. This is the only time we're gonna report back. If you make it, perfect. If you don't, we're not going to be able to meet with you because we're all super busy and our tribal partners are busy. And we always invite our tribal partners to, you know, walk the funders through in regards to like, well, what we're reporting back on those storytelling.
Hello, my question is, have you ever served communities that have been divided and in turmoil? And what steps did you make to support their trust building?
So short answer is we haven't had that experience of working with a community that is, you know, kind of, I don't want to say separate, but maybe just on different views of, you know, anything locally or politically, socially, etc. But one thing we have found that's been really helpful in terms of continuity and trust and relationships is not working with the administrative level. Because like here in New Mexico, most pueblos operate on one-year terms in terms of governors and their tribal leadership. So what we have found is by working at that level below them, the department level, because for the most part, those staff stay there. They're able to kind of help provide continuity, but introduce us to the next leadership as they're coming in the early part of the calendar year. So recommend that for folks if you're looking to work with the tribe. You know, yes, you want to work with the leadership and the administrative team, but to actually get good long-term commitment, trust, relationship, work with department level staff because they're the ones who are doing the work on the ground, writing the grants, know what's happening. Leadership teams are usually very, very busy. But in terms of, weaving that trust into relationship, it does take time. We come in with using these more than this, and it just allows us to better understand, like, what are their priorities and needs. And as an entity, we like to streamline, and reduce bureaucratic processes for these communities. For instance, we have taken on a multi-year agreement with the Forest Service so that tribes can actually do the work on the ground, which then just eliminates their time to go through that bureaucratic process. But it does take a lot of time. The hardest part is always navigating through that leadership transition. And some people don't always agree with what that project could be about, or don't always necessarily support what that project is about. And we've had some pushback from community members regarding, like, why are you building a hoop house here? No one's going to take care of it. In the past, infrastructure has always just been mismanaged or just kind of sits there. But we hear that and we value it, because then, like, for us, it's like, is it a risk to invest countless thousands of dollars into developing some form of a hoop house or greenhouse if it's just going to be not used in like 5 years? So it does take just time overall.
Hi, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us. I have two questions. The quick short is, where can we see that film that you were referring to?
Sorry, where are you? I was like, wait, okay. I thought it came from here.
Sorry. And then the bigger question is, for people who have land, whether it's easements or leases on forest land, or they happen to have a ranch of thousands of acres, and they want to start to incorporate, this rematriation process, is there a particular place that you would say, like from a personal point, not like a physical place, that is the most helpful for them to be approaching trying to get involved in that process?
That's a really great question. I fortunately don't feel like I'm competent enough to answer that, but I'm looking at Wyatt, who works for Montezuma Land Conservancy, who could probably talk a little bit about more of the background part of like land trust role, and like how they've navigated some of those conversations and supported those landowners who have interest in integrating TEK or inviting indigenous peoples to work with them. But I will say this, that in terms of the opportunity, if you have land or easements, like if it's grazing or whatever, that on public lands, and want to support and integrate, invite indigenous peoples and TEK into it, I 100% support, and like I would encourage you all to like continue to push for that. Inca is another great entity I would recommend you talk to here. They're based in Taos, I think, but Delane's a good friend of mine, and I saw him earlier, but he would be another entity and individual to talk to as well for that. Sorry, I just don't feel like I'm, again, competent enough to answer that and like provide misinformation.
Will you repeat where the film?
The film is actually not live yet. It's going through its final phases of approvals and edits. And like the Ute community, they just had tribal elections, so a new council is reviewing it, which is why it's not going to be live for maybe a few more weeks or months. But we are going to do like a national campaign, a tour of like, trying to get that video out on different stages and spaces. But once it's out, we'll work with our MLC partners, and maybe with Quivera, we can definitely share a link where the people can access it.
Yeah, and maybe there's a way, if you need folks' support, if it's just words of affirmation, like, yes, we want to see this project come to screens, I'm sure you can reach out to James and let him know you're happy to help.
Yep.
And James, thank you so much. That's all the time we have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, James.